I'm John Aiello, a librarian at Pearl River Public Library, and I'll warn you that I may need to give myself a haircut at this point. It's getting a little long, just kidding. It's been a long time since our last episode, and that's because I've been spending a lot of time learning how to juggle. And today I'm going to juggle for you. I'm going to be juggling 3 books, a table, and also a photograph plus a t-shirt. I've been practicing for quite a while. I've been practicing exclusively in my mind, which is good because I'll be juggling these items metaphorically, of course. And I'm juggling them all because in my mind at least they're all related. So let's jump in and start off right away. So first thing first, I'm wearing a t-shirt that was handmade by my wife. And when I say handmade, I don't mean she picked it out online and sent away for it. I mean she made the design herself, drew it, made the silkscreen herself, and hand printed it, which is going to be related to something we talk about later. This one is about Herman Melville and Moby Dick. And as you may remember in that book, at the beginning, Ishmael is kind of had it up to here with dry land. There's nothing left for him in Manhattoes, as he calls it. And he is ready to go take a little journey to see the watery part of the world. I love the way he says that. Okay, so that's our transition. Transition is to the next thing I will be juggling, which is this very small ID badge that was my father's ID badge in Pearl Harbor Navy Yard. He was part of the ship repair unit. He was born during the Depression, and having been born during the Depression, he spent his whole life being very interested in reusing things, salvaging things, and repairing things. And when he was about 17 and he had seen enough of New York himself, and it was a Depression and there wasn't much to offer a guy who was a teenager or 18 at that point, he also decided that it was time to see the watery part of the world, sort of a little journey you might say, and joined the Navy and ended up in Pearl Harbor Navy Yard, where he was part of the ship salvage crew. Jumping ahead quite a bit, when my wife and I got married, my father was still very interested in salvaging things, repairing things, finding things that people thought were no good, and making them look their best again by repairing them. We got a house in Pearl River, a house that was built in about 1915, and we were looking for a perfect table to fill a little nook at the top of the stairs, and all you had to do was mention to my father that you needed something, and it would sort of appear like a week later. He would just find it. So about a week later, after we bought our house, my father comes to us with a box of pink pieces of wood with stickers of superheroes on them and says, "I found your perfect table." It's got a postcard or index card on the top that says table with a question mark, $3. He got it at a garage sale, and he said it was lucky for us that the people who owned it had done such a good job destroying it, because underneath all the paint and stickers was a perfect table that was exactly what we needed. Okay, so all we had to do, he said, was strip the table and bring it back to its perfect condition. And here's the table, which we're going to look at a little bit more later. Now, the very interesting thing about this table is when I was stripping the table, I found on the bottom corner of it a diamond-shaped plaque, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And that plaque had a curious mark on it, which I didn't know what it was, and I thought about it a little, but not a lot. We kept the table and put some things on it. It looked great in the spot we had it in our house from 1915, and the table was from about 1915. We skip ahead about 10 years, and my wife and I go for a trip to New Hope, Pennsylvania. And while we're there, we go into a store that specialized in mission and arts and crafts stuff. I think it was called Mission Statement. And we're looking around, and as we're there, we see some furniture, some books. I notice a book on the shelf, and I pick it up, and it is the next book on our Curious Stack of books. It is this book. And I saw it on its spine. The first thing I saw was the spine of the book, and I found that interesting because it had the exact same marking as my table. So when I picked it up, I was looking at it for a bit, and the store owner came over and said, "You're interested in that book?" And I said, "Yeah, it's really cool." I said, "Particularly this thing." I said, "Because I have," and he interrupts me and goes, "Charlie, he's got the table." I said, "I've got the table?" He goes, "You've got the table." Charlie comes over flipping through a book and says to me, "Does your table have that marking on it?" And I said, "Yes." And he flipped to a picture of my table exactly. And he explained to me that this book, made by Elbert Hubbard, who was born in the 1800s and died in 1915 on the Lusitania, had created this book in his Roycroft community as part of his Roycroft Community Press. We'll back up a little bit here. Elbert Hubbard was a publisher, a writer, and a philosopher who was very much inspired by the arts and crafts movement and its leading proponent, William Morris. He sort of took after William Morris and created a community in East Aurora, New York, in the early part of the 1900s, and it was an arts and crafts community, printing books and making furniture and doing all sorts of arts and crafts. Notably, they wanted to make their items as handmade as possible and to avoid sort of industrial techniques that were now coming into popularity. Like the arts and crafts movement in England, they were sort of resisting that approach to the modern move to have things machine-made, and were making things by hand. I'm going to show you a couple of the books, the Little Journeys books, as they are called. And you'll notice that these books, which were published over a period of about 25 years, are made using techniques that make the books look much older than they are. We have ragged ends on the paper. The paper has the Roycroft watermark in it, and unlike most paper from this time period, it was made and dried on racks, so you can actually see the lines of the racks where it dried, much like you would see in a book from a century or two or more earlier. So, what is the link between the book and the table exactly? It turns out my table was called the Little Journeys table and had this symbol on it because my table was made specifically to hold these Little Journeys books, of which I now own 3 different copies, covering a span from the very early part of the 1900s to 1925. So that is our story today of the Little Journeys book table, which included the juggling of the Little Journeys table, the Little Journeys books, and the ID badge of my father, who found the table when it looked like nothing more than a bunch of pink boards. This is his ID badge from Pearl Harbor Navy Yard. Okay, so our next episode of the Curious Stack of Books should come a lot sooner than this one did, and we will have probably a simpler story, but a book that is no less curious. Okay, see you next time.